So we're going to launch right in today and talk about Ruby as a modern object-oriented language. And if you've come from the Java world, which many of you have, there's all these concepts that you sort of have to assimilate when you do object-oriented programming. You have to learn about objects, you have to learn about the attributes of objects, and you talk about getters and setters on attributes. You talk about the methods that objects support. Maybe if you've done C++, you know about operator overloading. There's things like interfaces, which allow you to add other behaviors to a class. Java also has these primitive types like integers, and you have to box and unbox them in order to do certain things to them. And at some point, you probably found yourself asking whether there isn't a smaller set of mechanisms that supports the things you're trying to do when you're using all these different mechanisms in a language like Java or C++. So Ruby's dramatic simplification of how to deal with this is to say everything is an object, everything. And the only way you get stuff done is by calling methods on objects. So what does this mean concretely? Well, first of all, even the lowly integer is a true object. That means that you can do things like call methods like days on actual integers. 3 days ago will tell you how many seconds it's been since 3 days ago. Now, in raw Ruby, this won't work. It'll work in Rails. I'll get back to why that happens. But to give you a sense, I can also say 50.methods. I'm asking the integer 50, what methods do you respond to? What things do you know how to do? And in fact, I can explicitly in Ruby talk about responding to. I can ask an object directly, what methods do you respond to, by using this built-in respond to method. See how good I am at drawing? I'm pretty good, huh? Yeah. In fact, all of these really can be thought of as syntactic sugar around a single construct, which is the send method. It's a language primitive. And that's the one that says, take the following method call and send it to the object. We say that the object is the receiver in that case. And the only thing Ruby cares about is whether the object you're sending a message to knows how to respond to that message. So for example, if I say 1 plus 2, what I'm really doing is saying shorthand for sending to the receiver, the object 1, the plus message with an additional argument of 2. That's really what's going on internally at the language level. So plus is really just another method, and it's a method that takes one argument, which is the thing to add to its receiver. Similarly, if I dereference an array with square brackets, really I'm sending the square bracket dereference method to the target array, and I'm passing another argument, which is what the subscript is that I want to get. We can do other examples, like when we do array assignment. What's going on here? Well, believe it or not, this is a method call. There's a method call that means assign to an array. And this time we need two arguments, which subscript to assign and what the new value ought to be at that place. But the important thing here is that there's actually a method defined on arrays called bracket equals. And when you say my array sub 3 equals foo, it's really just a shorthand, syntactic sugar, for calling the bracket equals method with those two arguments. This is a dramatically simplifying thing that it takes a little bit of getting used to, but bear with me for just a bit as I work through a few more examples. When I do a comparison, again, what am I doing? I'm sending the target a message of double equals with another argument of the thing to compare it to. And when I call a regular old function, I'm sending to self, which is the implicit receiver, right? If you don't see anything before the dot, it means whatever the value of self is. And we'll have a lot more to say about that when we talk about object orientation. So we're sending self the name of a method, myfunc, and one argument that's expected by that method. And the hope is that self has an instance method called myfunc in this case, and that myfunc is prepared to accept an argument. So that's what's going on there. So remember, when we do this, okay, save yourself a lot of grief. When you see the notation a.b, it means we're calling the method b on the object a. Okay, what does it not mean? It does not mean that b is an instance variable of a. It doesn't mean that A is some kind of a data structure and B is one of the fields of that data structure. It's nothing like that, right? So keeping this in mind will help you parse Ruby expressions that look a little confusing until you get more accustomed to the language, at which point it'll seem very natural. So understanding this distinction, keeping this one simple rule in mind, will save you a lot of grief and confusion. So when you say every operation is a method call, going a little more deeply into that, what does it mean? Well, here's 3 different uses of plus. And somebody unfamiliar with a modern, extremely object-oriented language like Ruby might look at those 3 lines and say, wow, if those are all legal calls, it must be the case that Ruby has some pretty sophisticated type inference and type conversion in place so that plus knows what to do depending on what the types of its 2 arguments are. But now that you understand that everything is an object and plus is just a method, it should be clear that what's going on here is these are 3 different methods. These 3 uses of plus are 3 different methods. One of them is the class class numerics definition of plus, another one is the array class's definition of plus, and another one is the string class's definition of plus. Now, how does Ruby know which one to use? Well, to take the third example here, when I say y equals quote hello plus quote world, what's the receiver of plus? Well, the receiver is this first argument, hello, and it's a string. So the string class is going to be the one where the plus method gets looked up. The plus method is going to get passed a second argument, in this case world, and it had better know how to do something sensible with that argument. So the answer to the question, what if I say foo plus bar, and foo plus bar maybe are of different classes or of different types, what happens then? Well, in foo plus bar, foo is the receiver, plus gets sent to it, and it will get past the argument bar, and it has to decide whether it can do something sensible based on what kind of a thing bar is. So one last thing before we get off of this quick intro topic, poetry mode. I mentioned in a previous lecture that I'm a really big fan of the minimum number of marks on the page that make it easy and clear to write the code and for other people to read the code. And one of the ways that Ruby supports this is through poetry mode. Here's an example of a legal Ruby statement that came from one of my apps using poetry mode. And you can almost read it aloud and figure out what the code does. Redirect to login page and return unless logged in. Code does not get much more transparent than that. But the reason this is legal is because when parentheses around function call arguments are optional, in other words, when the parser would not be confused by omitting them, Ruby lets you omit them. And also because braces around hashes can often be omitted if the context is unambiguous. So for example, if we rewrote this with fully parenthesized syntax, we could see that redirect to login page, this redirect to is a method that expects one argument, and is a standard Boolean connector, which you've seen before. Return, well, in this case, return isn't returning any explicit value, so it's like a function call, but there's no argument. And logged in happens to be another function. I didn't add the empty parens around it, right? So again, as you get used to the language, it'll become very natural and very clear to you when it's OK to leave stuff out. Here's another example. Dave alluded in one of the earlier lectures about the ability to write things like a should be greater than or equal to 7 when you're expressing test cases. So how can that possibly work? Well, again, if we parenthesize defensively, should is really just a function that takes one argument, and the argument that it takes is the expression b greater than or equal to 7. In this case, I happen to know that b isn't a variable. It's actually another function call. It's a method call. So in the poetry mode example, I've been able to omit both the empty parens around b, which tell us it's a function call with no arguments, and the parens around should, which capture its argument. One last example, and this is an example of omitting braces when it's obvious from context that something is a hash. This is an example of a call that is very common in Rails applications, saying to create a URL that links to a particular procedure in your program that handles some user interaction with the web app. So what we've done here is there's actually two things we've omitted. This is a function of one argument, and the argument is a hash. So because it's unambiguous in parsing, not only can we leave out the parens around the function argument, we can leave out the braces that normally would go around the hash literal. Now again, the first time you see this, it's a little confusing. You might not always realize when it's acceptable to do it and when it's not. So when in doubt, you can always parenthesize defensively. But in general, you'll very quickly get used to when this makes sense to do, and you're going to find that it makes your code much more readable.